I'm Henry the Eighth, I am. Henry the Eighth, I am. I got married to the widow next door. She's been married 7 times before, and everyone was an NRA. She wouldn't have a Willie or a Sam. I'm her 8th old man. I'm Henry the Eighth, I am. Hello. For my big return to YouTube, I thought I'd give a little promo for my upcoming course with Davenant Hall, The Church in Medieval England, 597 to 1485. Indeed, I've chosen to stop this course with the publication by Caxton of Mallory's Mort D'Arthur. Oh, sorry, what's that? With the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485. Oh, right, sorry. With the accession of Henry VII, the first of the Tudor monarchs, who defeated Richard III. Famous line from Richard, of course, verbatim, not made up by Shakespeare at all. A horse, my kingdom for a horse. So I've chosen to end at 1485, not taking us all the way through to the English Reformation. However, that said, one of the questions that is sort of a thread that will be running through the course, and that perhaps I'll consolidate right here, right now, for you lucky viewers to get for free on YouTube and maybe whet your appetite for a bit more English ecclesiastical history, is Henry VIII and the Act of Supremacy. Because I'm an Anglican, raised Anglican, baptized Anglican, confirmed Anglican, go to an Anglican church to this day, one of the few who survive. And the Act of Supremacy of 1534 is not actually some sort of bolt out of the blue that all of a sudden the King of England was like, fine, that's it. Like, this is how people sort of treat it. People sort of treat it as though when you meet your random friends on the street, like, oh, I think it's so cool, or I think it's a little bit troubling, or isn't it crazy that your church got started by a king just because he wanted a divorce and couldn't keep it in his pants? Right, so I thought I would give us a little video, sort of king and church in medieval England beyond Henry VIII's crotch. So step 1 of figuring out how the Act of Supremacy is a thing that's not a bolt out of the blue is, in fact, because I am that kind of historian, Constantine. That's right. Step 1 is Constantine. Well, it's actually a series of events that are set in motion by Constantine, sort of up to Charlemagne and, say, Alfred the Great in the later 9th century. The imperial church of late antiquity, and then the successor states. Because Constantine isn't just an emperor who happens to be a Christian, is he? We've already had enough debates over my video about Christianity before Constantine, about the sincerity of the man. I don't really care about that. Quite honestly, I care about what the history tells me. And the history tells me that he saw himself as being a great promoter of the church, a promoter of the peace of the church, as a protector of the church. And so then he does various things that are favorable to the institution of the church within the Roman Empire, the Catholic Church, small c Catholic Church within the Roman Empire. Also, this could be capital C, with there being just one. Anyway, so that is how Constantine views himself, and all of the Roman Empire emperors, except for, of course, Julian, our little pagan interlude in the 360s, all of the Roman emperors from him to 1453 see themselves as protectors of the church. They're defenders of the faith, one might even say. And so they protect the interests of the church, doing things like making imperial roads available to bishops and other clerics when they need to come to ecumenical councils that are called by emperors. All 7 of the ecumenical councils that are regarded in common by Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox and the Lutheran World Federation and certain Anglicans like me were called by Roman emperors. So that's a thing to think about. And so this is they see themselves as having this important role. And this continues throughout, that there is this union of emperor and church working together for the promotion of the true Christian religion and of virtue, that piety may exist within their own realm. So this is going on, and it is taken up by the successor states, by Merovingians, by, even by, although Arians, by Ostrogoths, Visigoths, and Vandals. Vandals in particular take up some of the legal action that Constantine was taking against groups considered by the imperial church as heretics, and leveling them against the Catholics in North Africa. the Homoousians, who represent the imperial church, and leveling the laws against them as heretics in the eyes of the Vandals. So, and then later on we see Charlemagne is sort of the big, because he's one of these guys like Constantine, he's a big guy who's around for a long time doing lots of stuff. And Charlemagne, the word that we use, and you can find it throughout Merovingian and Carolingian capitularies, the word is correctio. The correction, the right rule of the king. There's some false etymology from Isidore of Seville involved in this, but so the king has a duty as a Christian to promote true religion and to correct where things have gone astray, where there have been abuses in his church or whatever. And so then Charlemagne does things like he commissions Alcuin to be involved in the production of new, improved copies of the Latin Vulgate Bible, for example. He gets his hands on liturgical books from Rome and disseminates them throughout the Carolingian Empire. So this is what we call the Gregorian liturgy. The liturgy of St. Gregory is sort of the one that comes up under his name from Rome at this time, whether it is from Pope St. Gregory the Great. Not talking about that right now. And then also books of canon law. Also, he acquires these from Rome and disseminates them. So he himself, and he has things like the Admonitio Generalis in 780, the Council of Frankfurt in 794 to deal with it. He calls this, and all sorts of bishops come from all over, not just his empire, but from as far afield as that distant island kingdom of England. And they come and they debate in 794 at Frankfurt about adoptionism and about iconoclasm. In fact, about the 787 council from that place called Nicaea, which was summoned by the East Roman Emperor to put an end to iconoclasm. And so we have all these things, and Charlemagne is very active in doing these things as king, and then later on when he has himself crowned Roman Emperor in the year 800. So these guys are doing these things, and a lot of the time, bishops, of course, the big thing is, okay, so he's doing these things, but it looks like guys like Charlemagne and Constantine aren't really making and unmaking bishops. They're just sort of helping the bishops do their jobs. And that is most of what they're doing. But sometimes, these men are involved in the making and unmaking of bishops. Particularly, the closer the bishop is to the monarch, the more likely he is to be replaced by the monarch, which you see particularly in Constantinople. But you also see, for example, Pope Vigilius, who is Bishop of Rome from the 540s to the 550s. He is raised up by Justinian and ultimately brought low by Justinian, and then his successor is raised up by Justinian. So the Emperor Justinian, once he conquers the city of Rome, reconquers the city of Rome. There's a whole ecclesiastical history thing to say about him. Then the Bishop of Rome is all of a sudden coming under the influence, or Pope Martin I gets himself exiled by the emperor for resisting monothelitism in the 600s and holding a council in the Lateran in 649 that was against imperial ecclesiastical policy. All of a sudden, the Bishop of Rome finds himself exiled. Indeed, a lot of bishops find themselves exiled, whether they are defrocked or not, will vary from situation to situation under the emperors. And so the monarchs of Europe are often doing these same sorts of things. So these are things that are going on, and kings like Alfred the Great in like the 870s in England are also deeply involved in the cultural and religious life of the country, promoting sound institutions for the promotion of the Christian religion and Christian virtue, and making translations into the English language of important Christian texts so that the truth of the faith can be spread throughout the land more easily. So these are things we're thinking about, that this is part of the long game of what it means to be a European monarch in Christendom, starting with Constantine. So that's stage one. Step two, is the Investiture Controversy, which is a big thing that I actually talked about on the Ad Fontes podcast earlier this week. So the Investiture Controversy arises really in the early 11th century, late 11th century, really gets rolling because emperors now, Ottonian emperors of the Holy Roman Empires, of German emperors, and monarchs such as the kings of England are investing bishops with their authority. So, and what you do, what investiture is, I suppose I should have said that. Investiture is when you give someone his marks of office. You place a staff in someone's hand and he takes it, right? And this is seen, and as soon as, say, if you take the shepherd's crook or you get the mitre put on you, or in the case of a knight, you have your sword buckled on. If you get your sword buckled onto you, that is the event in sort of the High Middle Ages. That is the event that is seen. This is when you're really a monk, a knight. Or if you're a monk, you get your hair tonsured. You get your tonsure. Once you've been shaved, that's when you're really a monk. In a ritual world where symbol is reality, these sorts of actions carry much greater weight than perhaps they would in our world. And so actually, this, both in terms of investiture, this sort of worldview also is things like if you cut someone's hair, that can actually be a thing that removes his power. This like literally removes his power to rule, his power over others. In the case of Merovingian kings, Merovingians always wore their hair no shorter than mine, in fact. So these are the guys before the Carolingians, the people who were ruling over France from the 6th and 7th and into the 8th centuries. And if you, basically when you want to remove a Merovingian rival, you cut his hair short. And this removal of the hair symbolizes the removal of his power, much like the cutting of Aslan's mane by the White Witch in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So anyway, so investiture is a symbolic action that makes your accession into office a reality. And so the Pope is saying, yo, kings, you aren't the people who make the bishops. You can't just William Rufus can't just put the staff of office into Anselm of Canterbury's hand, and that makes him Archbishop of Canterbury, and you certainly can't ask Anselm for money. So this whole thing arises, in England, it arises around Anselm, because what should we say? It is not unlikely that Lanfranc, Archbishop of Canterbury under William the Conqueror, and his successor Anselm, Archbishop of Canterbury under William II, William Rufus, and William of St. Calais as well, Bishop of Durham. Seems not unlikely that these men were, in fact, royal appointments. We're talking about Normans coming from major monastic houses in Normandy, coming to major episcopal sees in England in like the decade or two, or in case of Anselm a bit later, after the conquest, when the Normans are consolidating their power. Because when the Normans come and they basically replace as much of the English aristocracy as they possibly can, and then they start filling empty ecclesiastical offices with their own men as well. But if things were operating the ways they're imagined to operate, then places like Durham and Canterbury should actually have a free election done by the monks to choose who the bishop is, which of course, I'm sure they actually did have a free election. But I sort of feel like with people like William the Conqueror, who back then they called William the Bastard, and people like William Rufus, yeah, there's a free election. You sort of look out over the wasteland of northern England and say, yes, we're going to freely choose the Bishop of Durham. So anyway, Anselm, regardless of how he arrives there, and I mean, he did have a good, strong relationship when he was the abbot of the monastery at Becket. So it could be that they did freely elect him because they liked him, and they knew that he's the kind of guy, a well-educated man from Normandy. He actually himself is from modern Italy, but he's coming out of Normandy. He's the sort of guy the king probably be in favor of. So maybe they did freely choose him to be Archbishop of Canterbury, but the king still did the investing of the office, which is not the way it's supposed to be according to the Pope, right? And so there's this whole dispute arises from there. Also, the king starts asking Anselm for money, and Anselm's like, no, that's called simony. You can't actually buy clerical offices. And the king says, this is to pay for all the fancy stuff that I did for you. He's like, well, I don't need the fancy stuff. What do you think you're doing? And so then Anselm has to go down to Italy, and so he actually spends a lot of time outside of England, even after he's Archbishop of Canterbury, but still manages to write some of his greatest theological treatises at the same time. This is not the only time this is going on. The investiture of a bishop by the prince, by the king in England or the king in France or the emperor in Germany is an ongoing thing, and it's a problem for the bishop in Rome. We're talking about specifically, starting 1070, a guy called Gregory VII, a Hildebrand, a firebrand. That was his given baptized name before his pope name of Gregory. Gregory being, of course, a significant name. One of his predecessors is Leo IX. Both of these guys have chosen the names of popes who were called the Great because they're trying to reform the papacy and get real power, real spiritual power within Western Europe. This is what Leo IX, Gregory VII are all about. Because the papacy, particularly in the 10th century, it had a bit of a slump. It was really pretty much being controlled by Italian aristocratic families, and they were like, ugh, we're losers, basically. And they're like, we don't have any control over anything. Canon law is just like going into disarray. There are just married priests going around, having kids, passing on their parishes to their sons, which is like one of the main reasons why they're calling for clerical celibacy at this time, although it's been on the books since like the 4th century or earlier. And then they're looking around and say, married clergy, simony people are paying for clerical high offices. That's not allowed. And so they're really concerned about that. And just anyway, there are a bunch of things going on that count as abuses. And my phone has an alarm going off. And so then guys like this are trying to deal with it. And so they start taking a firmer hand in canon law, start trying to be more active in their approach to the rest of Europe, including the Greek East, who they succeed in creating a schism within 1054 under Leo IX. Gregory VII, really active letter writer. He is the first bishop of Rome from whom we have the complete original handwritten copy of his register of letters. There are other letters that didn't make it into there because you don't keep a copy of absolutely everything in the Middle Ages. That's expensive. So we can actually get a pretty good look at this man. So this is what they're doing. And part of what's going on here is this idea that, well, who's the ultimate arbiter of who should be a bishop? And sort of the idea is, well, probably shouldn't be the king, should it? I don't think it should be the king. That's sort of even what we today might say. We don't want the secular officials to be the people who are determining who our bishops are, do we? I mean, it seemed okay when it was Elizabeth I, but if Elizabeth II is just a figurehead, do we really want the Queen or the Crown appointing the Archbishop of Canterbury? Because does that mean it's the Prime Minister? Do we want Boris Johnson? Do we want Boris Johnson appointing the Archbishop of Canterbury? Well, the Pope would say no. And so this is what it's all about. This is what the Investiture Controversy is about. And it basically continues on, though, right? The kings of England continue sort of getting their own guys appointed to be king, such as Thomas Becket goes from Chancellor to Archbishop of Canterbury. And the king says, great, I have taken one of my own clerics, a man I have raised up to high secular office. I've just put him into the highest ecclesiastical office in the land. Dude's going to do whatever I say because he's my man, right? This is what Henry II thinks. He's like, this is my man. And then Thomas Becket, who seems to be a man who takes all of his duties seriously, instead says, sorry, bro, I'm the Pope's man. Because the Pope is the person from whom spiritual authority flows, according to medieval ecclesiological thought. And so then this gets Thomas Becket killed, basically. That's like the short version. There, you can see there's John Guy's book. That's the long version. Take my course, you'll get more details about what's going on with Thomas Becket. But like, the Becket controversy is part of this. And so the kings of England do actually, it looks like they're slowing down on investiture a little bit, but then King John, who's like, this is the same guy who's Prince John in Robin Hood, so you know, if he's voiced by Sir Peter Ustinov, maybe not the best king. So, King John, however, raises up his own guy to be Archbishop of Canterbury. The monks of Christ Church Canterbury raise up their own guy to be Archbishop of Canterbury, which is the traditional custom, is that the monks elect the guy, right? I said that already. The monks elect the guy, and then what's really supposed to happen is whether the king invests him with the crozier, or the pope sends him the pallium, or whatever, or he goes to Rome and petition and gets acknowledged by the pope. The monks have still chosen the guy. He's just formalized by king or pope. But Innocent has this guy. And John's like, well, I'm not backing down. I'm the king. This is what my ancestors did. This is what Dad did. And so Innocent III is like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to lay an interdict upon the entire kingdom of England, which means that no sacraments performed by a priest are valid. So you can see these things are going back and forth. So this is the early 1200s. But what do we have to say about that? Investiture of people like the Archbishop of Canterbury is not the only thing going on that's leading to the Act of Supremacy. It's a big thing, and Pope and King are going to continue negotiating a long time. Step 3, however, is something that's been going on since earlier in the 1100s, which is papal appointments to benefices and prebends. That you're a priest of probably not like some tiny nothing village, but a local priest could be an appointment from the Pope himself. And so people, and you can actually make some sweet cash being a clergyman. You don't have to be very good at preaching or anything. You just, if you're a cleric of some sort and you have the right connections, you make a petition to Rome, and the Pope says, yeah, you can be the priest of this town in England. And so you go off and you get your whatever, all your money, you collect all the local tithes and whatever. You have a nice, moderately middle-class, comfortable lifestyle. We're not talking aristocratic glory here. But it's not bad. It's not probably have a mistress on the side and a bunch of illegitimate children, right? So this is a thing that's been going on as well. And it's a thing that people have been upset about. Sort of Bernard of Clairvaux, who is the spiritual mother of Pope Eugene, I forget which number, Pope Eugenius, writes him a thing where he says, hey, watch out, my son. You better, don't listen to all these people who are here at the papal court, tickling your ears or trying to, spoil you with money. Make sure appointments are being done validly for the spiritual health and the pastoral care of the people who are under their charge, because you are responsible for, if you are at the top, you have to be really careful that you do a good job of administering those people who are underneath of you. So that's the De Consideratione. It has been translated into English by the Cistercian Press, of course. So, and then Robert Grosseteste also goes and he's like infuriated. He's a bishop as well as a philosopher and theologian, and his diocese just has all of these appointments being made that are they're ridiculous. They are not people he would have chosen. They are bad at their jobs. They're no good. And he's concerned about the pastoral care. Grosseteste is one of those really cool guys. He's concerned about the pastoral care of the people under his charge. He spent a period of time, he was the confessor for a group of Oxford Franciscans, just to give you an example of medieval Christianity in action. And as penance for one over-scrupulous monk who's like, those are the people who are always worried, I'm sinning all the time, I don't know what to do, I'm not being good enough, was to have a glass of wine and relax. That was the penance for this guy's scrupulosity, which I thought, that's pretty cool. Grosseteste, you're pretty awesome in my books. So Grosseteste goes down to Rome to make his petition to the Bishop of Rome that he needs to stop making all these horrible appointments. And so the solution is found by the King of England. Why don't I make the appointments? And so this is step 3. No, we just did step 3 is the papal appointments. Step 4 is the royal acquisition of the appointments from the Pope. Allegedly, the spiritual reason for doing this is that the king is on the ground. He knows what's going on. He has his ear to the ground amongst the nobles and amongst the clergy of his realm, the House of Bishops. All these people meet in council with the king. And so then he can better choose who should be appointed in the Kingdom of England than the Pope can. And so then this is really consolidated by Edward III. Edward III is king from 1327 to 1377. So we're talking about, about 75 years after the death of Grosseteste to over 100 years after, right? He's king for 50 years, more than 50 years, because there are some months added on. And the vast majority of appointments made in the Kingdom of England by the time Edward III dies are being made by the king. So that's most of them, basically. Like, whether you're talking bishops or whether you're talking about local priests, they are being appointed by the king. So this is the ecclesiastical policy and ecclesiastical situation of the Kingdom of England from 1377 onwards. The Pope never gets these back, folks. The king he's doing it all, right? And so we come to 1534. We have a powerful Renaissance king, the guy who built Hampton Court Palace, who thought that the best thing on earth was going to be a wine fountain, who makes this beautiful chapel in the palace that is in the Tudor Gothic style, whose resistance to Lutherans and Lutheranism gained him the title Defender of the Faith, which is actually still on some British coinage, along with the image of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. Henry VIII, the great staunch defender of Catholicism, of the Catholic way, a man who is maintaining the law of his ancestors against English Bibles. Side note, vernacular Bibles are not a problem outside of the Kingdom of England. But they still exist in England, in like lots of places. So, and apparently some people, their problem with Tyndale's wasn't that it was in English, it was that it was a bad translation. So, continuing. This is the Henry VIII we're talking about. And his consolidation, although his consolidation of all of the power in the person of the king is the thing that gets the Reformation moving in England, things start happening, like the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, all of a sudden gets married, right? Well, legally married. Or he changes his mind on the law against English Bibles. Nevertheless, the liturgy remains Catholic. The liturgy remains the Roman Mass according to the use of Sarum continues to be used throughout the reign of Henry VIII. People call it Henrician Catholicism. Really, it's just the last stage of medieval English Catholic religion. The number of reforms are not actually that great, especially because vernacular Bibles, like we have German and Italian and French vernacular Bibles from the same period. So it's no sudden shocker that Henry VIII is putting out English Bibles. He's gone all Protestant. It's not like there are no other vernacular Bibles in Europe. Anyway, maybe the vernacular Bibles thing is a bigger deal than that, but I think that because of our narrow English view of a lot of things, we overemphasize it. Like, especially the number of Wycliffe Bibles we have that predate the Act of Supremacy. That's also a thing to wonder about. Why are they still printing them? How are they still printing them? So anyway, but this is what's going on, and this is the background. It's not just that one day the king was like, I really need that divorce. What could I come up with? I know, I'll just put all the power of the church in my hands. Nope. Now, some of the things that he did once he acquired that power are reformational things. But the acquisition of the power by the king has deep medieval roots, stretching back to most closely to Edward III in the 14th century, but back before that to the Normans, and before that to Charlemagne and Constantine. All of these things take a particular shape in Western Europe that emerges in Henry VIII in his own schism with the Roman Catholic Church. So that's all I have for today. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you again hopefully next week. I'll make another video.